Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Jet Rails podcast. I'm Robert, your host, and today we're going to be talking about creating a data-driven culture within your e-commerce business. It sounds simple and it sounds obvious, but it's actually, as many will attest to in the industry, it's a challenge to really get the right footing around collecting, storing, analyzing your data, actually putting it to good use. And we've got a great guest with us today. We've got Nick from the DAS42 team, who's really built up a powerhouse worth of knowledge on the subject. So with no further ado, Nick, would you do the honor of introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, Robert. Thanks for having me. So everyone, I'm Nick Amabile. I'm the CEO over at DAS42. DAS42 is a boutique data and analytics consulting firm. And as Robert mentioned, we have a lot of experience working with e-commerce companies, implementing data platforms, data programs broadly at e-commerce companies. My personal background is actually in e-commerce as well. So most recently before DAS42, I was the head of business intelligence at Jet.com. And prior to that was in senior analytics roles at Etsy. So a lot of personal experience as a practitioner in the e-commerce space in terms of data and analytics. But then now, of course, at DAS42, we consult for very large e-commerce companies as well as startups and direct-to-consumer companies as well. So a breadth of experience and really excited to be here. So thanks for having me, Robert.
No, thanks for joining today. And I have to ask before I go any further about the company name, because I hear DAS and it's spelled DAS, not like the operating system DOS.
Yep.
And as soon as I see DAS, I start thinking about Das Boot, and I have German in my head, and I'm thinking about submarine warfare and all sorts of things. How did the company get its name?
Yeah, it's a funny story. So I didn't found DAS42. I took it over from a guy named Lucas. The original corporate name was Data and Analytics Services, LLC. So that was, just an acronym. DAS stands for Data and Analytics Services. Coincidentally, though, Lucas is actually German. So I think people who know Lucas and the history of DAS42, do get it confused. And of course, 42 is the, answer to life, the universe, and everything. So Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference there, which is, a good one for, us nerds and programmers out there. So
all those hoopy fruits out there listening. Yeah,
that's right.
That's pretty, that's got to be one of the best business names that we've had on the podcast. And we're inching closer to 100 episodes. So that's a pretty good accolade.
Well, I gotta say, I mean, the corporate, the .com is available. It's short, it's punchy. Everyone kind of remembers it. It sticks out in folks' minds. And of course, the puns and the play on words just keep coming. Like our training program, for example, is called DOS Bootcamp, of course. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to dive in on some of your background because, when I hear companies like Etsy and Jet, I imagine that your time there imprinted a lot on you. Fast growth, a lot of data to crunch, a lot of things just buzzing around. Usually I find that folks that spend enough time in those big companies, they wind up with some key takeaways about, things. In this case, leveraging e-commerce data. What did you find that those companies understood, or that you figured out there that others should be aware of, that others should be leveraging, and just might not be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I learned so much from both of those two experiences. Worked with a really great team, smart people. So I can't say that, I sort of figured everything out there. But what I will say is, I've spent a lot of my career kind of banging my head against the wall on a lot of common challenges that we see our clients face at DAS42. For example, having different numbers for the same metric. So in other words, back when I was at Etsy, you would ask maybe 10 different people what, merchandise sales were, or sort of how many orders we had yesterday. You would get 10 different answers, right? And we had an internal business intelligence tool there that you would log into, and you might search for conversion rate, right? Super key metric for e-commerce companies. You would search in this tool and there'd be like 50 different conversion rate reports, and some of them would be broken. Some of them you don't know who wrote them. Maybe they're no longer at the company and all this kind of stuff. So this is a challenge that I think is pervasive across a lot of companies. The other thing I'll say at Jet, I started there between the Series A and the Series B. I think even at that point, there were probably 500 people when I started, and when I left, there were over 1,000 people. So tons of fast growth. And when I got there, everyone was still really into spreadsheets, and this is common again. Like this is, it's a common problem we see with our customers at DAS42 is that Folks try to do a ton of stuff in Excel. Excel's great. I mean, I love Excel. I've used it a ton. I still use it today. But, there's a lot of issues with information retrieval. Folks would go to different portals, different tools, and download data, munge it in Excel. It's very error prone, right? And it's not very reproducible. It's not very transparent. So creating a culture of data, we kind of have to solve some of these challenges. We have to still let folks get access to data really easily. So, kind of that downloading of data from different portals, that's easy for them. So we have to make it very easy for them to use data. But it has to be governed, it has to be trusted, and it has to be standardized, right? So that you don't have 10 different reports with 10 different numbers for conversion rate, for example. So those are some of the challenges that, I face and that we see some of our customers face. And that's really, why I started consulting, was to try to bring some of the lessons that I had learned in those experiences and come out and try to help other folks solve the same problems.
With that in mind, I find that one of the other challenges that really fits in with that is when that key person that's running those custom reports and ripping it apart in Excel is unavailable, whether they move on for better or worse, or they're on vacation or something else. It's not it's not easy. It's not reproducible. You're not able to. And in terms of having perhaps that chain of thought, to be able to compare like numbers. In order to really watch for trends, if you're not able to have that fluid visual on it, to be able to see, okay, this time last year it was this, and this time this year, it's got to be apples to apples, because otherwise you could just pull the report slightly differently, and next thing you know, you have such a different picture. And with that in mind, I know that one of the challenges here is figuring out, who are the key people that need access to the data to be able to pull the data, manipulate the data. Yep. In your opinion, should it be the IT leadership within an e-commerce business that's spearheading data and analytics, or should someone else in the organization be, whether it's a stakeholder or the owner of that, or should it be multiple owners? Should everybody just be able to pull the same data whenever they want, however they want?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that we've seen, both in my career and at DAS42 is that oftentimes data projects do fail because they start with an IT lens, and we get, a lot of folks coming to, us to say, hey, I want to implement this data warehouse or this technology, this BI tool. And we always sort of reframe the question immediately and say, well, what are you trying to do? Let me talk to the business folks to understand, do you want to look at marketing ROI? Do you want to look at customer acquisition costs? Do you want to look at conversion rate and funnel analysis? Like what's kind of the business driver here, and what is the business trying to achieve? So we always start from that business lens first and foremost. Again, in my career, I've seen sort of the business team deliver some requirements to an IT team. The IT team goes away for 6 months, builds something, comes back to the business, and the business says, "Hey, this isn't what I built. This isn't doing what I needed to do." Right? So something just gets lost in translation, a lot of times, because the business folks don't completely understand the technology, and vice versa, the technology folks don't understand the business. And so that's really what we do at DAS42, is bridge that gap, understand the business imperatives that customers are going through, and then work backwards to a technical solution. But to answer your question, one of the things that is really part of our philosophy and how we approach these projects is we think everyone within an organization needs to be able to ask and answer their own questions. So, for example, marketers, right? They're not typically folks that know different programming languages, know a whole bunch about databases and other things like that. But you know what? They know a whole lot about marketing, right? And so even if I'm in the analytics team or an IT team, I can sort of anticipate what they might want. But at the end of the day, it's really important to have those domain experts that know about, marketing, for example, to be able to slice and dice their data, ask their own questions. Because what happens is, if I just deliver a report to a marketing team, they'll take a look at it. They'll be like, cool, this is great. I found some insights here. But now I have a whole bunch of other questions, right? So you want to keep that iterative process going where I can ask questions, get an answer back. That's going to get more questions and more answers and so on and so forth. So one of the key pieces of the strategy that we employ with our clients is to create a self-service, a governed self-service, sort of reporting interface that folks can access very easily and ensure that it's trusted and standardized. So like I talked about before, kind of having that business definition really be the same across all different reports. So everyone's talking about the insights from data rather than whose numbers are right. That's also a common thing that we see.
Yeah. And I think that we've seen a lot of that sort of process happening across the board in the industry. For instance, marketers like having page design tools, page builders, things like that. And the same when it comes to the marketing platforms that, for email marketing and other things, they'd like to be able to do something on the fly without needing to have their dev team involved and break into that workflow. And, the same, there's platforms like Canva and all sorts of things where you can design up little things that they want to be able to do more with, with the skill set that they have.
Absolutely.
The tools that they have. And so the more that we're all empowering that, I think, as an industry, it's the dream. It's, no more silos. Everyone can do everything. There's, I think, some, depending on the organization, that sometimes you really do want some people that have certain expertise to be able to take things to another level, but trying to get the baseline stuff, that quick report. I'm always amazed at how many businesses I run into that don't even have a really strong understanding of which products are driving their profits, their success, which are loss leaders, which are generating the sale, where they're getting the upsells and cross sells. There's so much happening there that often doesn't get fully analyzed, and sometimes because they just don't have the right data set in front of them or the right tools to break it down. Now, I do see so some of that core there comes down to having a unified data management platform, business intelligence, analytics, lots of names for the platforms that people slice and dice their data with. But, from your perspective, does everything need to wind up in one unified platform for analysis, or are there certain pieces of data that should be on one side of the aisle, others on another for one reason or another?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of default answer that we operate from is yes, everything should be in one place because, as you said, right, you want to look at the full kind of life cycle of, customer journeys and orders and other things like that. Right. And so, for example, you want to understand, from which channel did folks come to the website, obviously, and then, what did they buy? And now you have to also think about, like you said, profit margins, product attributes, all the metadata associated with, categories and other things like that. And then you also think about maybe shipments and cancellations and returns and other things like that. Right. And so all these different concepts, like a return, like a marketing channel, they typically all live in different systems, right? They might live across a ERP finance system. You might have a third party shipment, provider or something like that. So it lives in the third party logistics provider. That the shipment data, the return data, maybe somewhere else. The marketing channel is coming from AdWords or wherever it's coming from. So all this data lives in these silos, and to be able to really create this holistic picture of your business, you have to get it in one place. It just has to be, from a technical perspective, you have to be able to join it together. And that kind of example that I was given before about Excel, like that's really what people are doing, right? They're sort of centralizing the data in a spreadsheet, doing a VLOOKUP, and combining that data together. In database terminology, that's like more of a join, right? So we can create this in an automated fashion in a way that's very scalable, and deliver a holistic picture of the business and customers for our clients.
Well, I mean, we're definitely now in the ramp up for the holiday shopping season, and I'm always amazed at how hard it is for some folks to forecast, both for supply chain issues and I think above and beyond that for returns, and especially if they're selling through additional channels like Amazon, where the cost to the merchant on some of those returns can really wipe out a lot, if not all, the profit, depending on what category of products we're talking about and what kind of margins. And so that kind of forecasting, not knowing exactly, what you can expect, like, you might see sales in November, but until you finish, tabulating all the returns and things in January, you don't even know what you're left with. That there's so many moving parts there as you continue to scale and work with additional sales channels and such. Do you find that there are reports that you typically find merchants aren't yet running, but could be easily once they get the data into one of these unified platforms?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a couple things that that I think are hallmarks of a mature organization, let's say, in terms of data and analytics when it comes to e-commerce and retail. Certainly we just talked about the margin piece, right? Because a lot of times folks, when they're looking at like a customer acquisition cost or lifetime value type analysis, they're not including all the returns, the customer service costs, like a lot of the other costs. And a lot of times, to be honest, I mean, folks are just looking at gross merchandise kind of value, right? They're actually just looking at a gross number and not thinking about, okay, what is my actual sort of gross margin on this product? Then plus all the other things that it takes out of it, like I said, customer service and returns and things like that. So that's one. The other piece is, cohort analysis. So a lot of businesses that I've worked at, both at DAS42 Consulting, but also sort of my time at Etsy and Jet, looking at those repeat purchases and being able to sort of really capture, an audience, sort of a diehard set of folks who are coming back and returning often to buy from your business. It doesn't apply to every company, depending on kind of what kind of category and mix you're in. But a lot of companies like Etsy, for example, is typically a holiday type business. Sometimes people go to Etsy, buy holiday gifts, decorations, that kind of thing, or they maybe come and buy wedding stuff if it's wedding season. But obviously, Etsy wants to not just have a one-time a year purchase around the holidays. They want to actually have repeat purchases with, things like, common items that you might have, like leather goods, et cetera. So thinking about the category mix and looking at that cohort analysis to see, who are your best customers, who are returning, who aren't returning, and then correlating that with, maybe first purchase category, or looking at time of year, like seasonality, as I just mentioned, or maybe marketing channel. So being able to come up with these different cohorts on the fly is super important. And that's quite challenging, mostly from a technical level, but also thinking through it from a business perspective is very important. So.
Fantastic. Well, somewhere in there, I had a joke about people in leather goods, but it's a family-friendly podcast, so I'll skip over that.
Well, I was literally it was on the top of my head because I was actually talking with some friends who I used to work with at Etsy the other day, and I was saying, hey, yeah, I wanted to get a new belt, and so I searched online. Just a Google search for a belt, and Etsy came up, and we were kind of talking about how well they're doing around like product listing ads and other things like that.
Absolutely.
Actually, one of the things that my friend mentioned is sort of like masks were a really big category last year, and now obviously that's kind of rotating out. But they have been able to convert a lot of folks who came to Etsy for handmade masks, convert them over into, more other categories and things like that, which I think is pretty cool and exciting to think about. Certainly, relevant to a lot of folks during the pandemic and e-commerce businesses.
Yeah, I think e-commerce in general, that there are so many categories where, they've been able to retain shoppers in one way or another. That weren't otherwise shopping online for certain goods. But, once you have a customer, once they're following you on social, once, you've got them on an email list, you have that retention rate. You have that customer lifetime value to keep working towards. So,
yeah. And that's the thing that, we work with a lot of customers at DAS42 around, marketing attribution, right? And of course, like, you have this idea of sort of last touch, first touch, multi-touch attribution models. And to your point, right? Like you want to be able to understand all the different touch points that go into a sale for a customer across all those different channels. You mentioned like social, you mentioned email. Of course, there's probably like organic search. In my example of looking for that belt, I went through a product listing ad on Google search. So all these different touch points, create that, loyalty and that sort of repeat purchase. And then, like I said, just having a diverse category mix. But, it really comes from, again, having that data to be able to, just ask and answer these questions in a very iterative fashion. Like, okay, what are people buying last year in 2020? Okay, it's masks. How many of those folks that bought a mask in 2020 are coming back? And then analyzing, excuse me, which categories are they buying, right? Is it, it can't be masks anymore, or probably isn't masks. So what else is it? And so how can we start to explain that? And come up with different hypotheses. But, again, it has to be somebody that knows about the business enough to be able to ask the right questions and really dive in there. It can't just be, the IT team or a central analytics team to kind of figure that out, because we're just not going to have the business context that folks who are on the front lines really have.
Yeah. I wonder, I'm always surprised by some of the stories that come up in the industry. It sounds like by the time that you're done getting someone's data all, nice and clean and orderly, sometimes they're surprised by what they see. Have you run into clients that have been really surprised by their actual profit margins or other stats, because whatever they had thought, you turned it upside down?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's quite common. Is that when you talk about a self-service model, right? We're getting data to everyone in the business, but everyone has a different level of kind of data literacy, as we like to say, right? So there is a pretty big change management component that we always do with our clients, and that I've learned. And with any new tool, like BI tool or new data tool, you really only have one chance to get a first impression correct, right? And if somebody logs into a brand new BI tool, it's supposed to save them all this time and be automated. They log in and they see something that they don't understand, that they don't that they think is wrong. They're going to blame the tool, and you kind of have lost that person now for a long time. So to your question about sort of folks understanding the data. There's a whole set of data governance initiatives that we typically work with our clients to implement that help you understand what data is available to you, understanding the context of this data. So what the business definition is. So not necessarily looking at rows and columns, but like customers, order, shipments, like business concepts. And yeah, a lot of times what we find is that the definition that somebody might have been using previously is now different and changed because we take a look at, and when we go into a business, we look at all their KPIs. We understand kind of what the different definitions of those KPIs are. And a lot of times we iterate on that definition because we say, okay, have you really thought about, like you said, returns? Have you thought about, I don't know, taxes and shipping and other things like that? So like, how do we actually define gross merchandise value or something like that? And we have to be quite precise with our definitions, and that all will sometimes surprise folks because now we're starting to think a little bit more in a nuanced way about our KPIs than saying just, hey, it's GMV, it's the dollar amount that we sold, right?
Absolutely. I'm always blown away by how some of that goes. Sometimes it becomes important when you're looking at bringing in, if you get to the point that you want investors or that you want to be acquired, you have to follow standard definitions. And, you're going to have to reformulate your bookkeeping around it anyway. We had a recent podcast episode on the topic of acquisitions, and that's one of the most common challenges is just following the right process so that you can be properly evaluated, because no one wants to be gets just so far into the acquisition process and then find out that the numbers are going to rework and it's all going to fall apart.
As somebody who went through a growth equity financing earlier this year at DAS42, we had a lot of different requests for metrics, and to your point, everyone needs to be on the same page about what these metrics mean, how we're defining them, and understand the different nuances, because, even if we talk about something like revenue, there's sort of an accounting definition of revenue. Sometimes there's a more business definition. And that's the other piece too, is that we see with some of these data governance initiatives is really understanding, that there probably are valid ways to look at a KPI slightly differently, depending on sort of your lens. And so that's the other piece, is sort of curating the experience for individual teams. So like in the BI tool, for example, we might customize the experience for a marketing team versus the sales team, so that the sales team isn't seeing a whole bunch of stuff that's not relevant to them or confusing to them or slightly different from what they expect. But again, it needs to be really documented. It needs to be transparent around what's going on. So that way it's not a black box and people don't get confused. But, to your point, the definitions is super critical. And we find that that's a big part of the consulting work that we do, is helping people understand their definitions and, really standardize them across teams and help them document it so that it's understood by everyone.
I know. A couple of minutes ago, you mentioned data governance. And that, for me, my head started going toward data privacy. That's certainly been a big topic and continues to be and will be for the foreseeable future. As all this data gets pulled into one unified place, is it best to anonymize it, or is it otherwise going to fall under a lot of data privacy and other regulation?
Yeah. So first off, let me just say I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal advice. But to your point, I'm
going to cut that "not" word in post. We're going to make sure that
right, exactly. But obviously, we work with a number of very large, public clients, global clients that are subject to lots of different regulations. Certainly, yes, we want to make sure that we understand who should have access to what data. So like at a public company, for example, even like revenue data and sort of forward-looking information is typically, sequestered to a certain number of folks. it's a little bit more complex than just saying anonymize everything in the data warehouse, because that sounds great in theory, but now you're talking about to a marketing team, for example, that wants to create personalized emails based on purchase behavior, right? So we need to have these emails and other things. I mean, maybe it's like mail, you're going to do a direct mail campaign, that kind of stuff. So we have to have this data. If the customer gives us this data in a way that is, subject to all the different things that you need to be subject to, and you do it the right way, you need to be able to use that data. So there's different technical methods that we use and different tools and technologies out there to be able to anonymize the data on the way in, and then if we need to get the data out, we can de-anonymize that data and send it to a marketing activation platform. But that's obviously super critical. And there's a lot of things around metadata management. So in other words, knowing where your PII data is and knowing what types of PII data you collect. A lot of customers that we work with don't necessarily know that, and they haven't had it tagged yet. So it's a big challenge, and something that's really on the top of mind with a lot of folks, as you I think alluded to. First party data is becoming more and more critical, as kind of cookies and third party sort of tracking and different sort of changes in the ecosystem are happening. It's really critical to have that first party data and be able to leverage it. It's really become much more of an asset now than it has in the past.
Absolutely. Well, now that we've touched on legal matters, I think we've covered all the important checkboxes, right? I mean,
yeah, right, exactly.
Before we wrap it up, Nick, any final thoughts? Anything that we skipped over, or anything in your crystal ball as we head into 2022?
No, I mean, I'm not a big prognosticator. I mean, I think one of the things that I'll say to kind of wrap it up is, these initiatives around data and analytics don't need to boil the ocean, right? It's just really important to get started and to have a thoughtful plan around how to go about implementing these type of programs. So again, I don't want to scare folks out there by saying this is too difficult, because it's not. It could really start small, and even just kind of making sure your Google Analytics is set up correctly, and a lot of things like that are basics, right? So it's important to get started, and it's important to start early. I think that's the other piece that we see a lot of customers come to us when they felt the pain already, and then they're kind of in a jam. So I would encourage everyone out there to get started early, start thinking about data and analytics and how it can impact their business early and often. So, and of course, we're always happy to help here at DAS42. So.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you again for your time today. This was fantastic. We hope to have you on again sometime in the future to see what's new in the data world, because it's evolving fast. But in the meantime, to our listeners and viewers, as always, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy selling out there.